Welcome back to another very special episode of the Oh No 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 podcast. Having progressed through the first round of our Europe 95 podcasts, we've been given a comfortable home draw for our second time out. Steven Lawther is not only one of our own Raith Rovers fans, but also an author, having initially started with 2014's Unthinkable, Raith Rovers' improbable journey from the bottom to the top of Scottish football. He has then progressed to 2021's Arrival, how Scotland's women's team took their place on the world stage and inspired a generation with the progression to qualify for the 2019 World Cup. And as you'll probably be well aware, in his latest offering, he has spoken about how we led in Munich with Raith Rovers in 1995 and our European travails. I'm your host this evening, Robbie Weir. Firstly, Stephen, how are you getting on?
I'm doing very well. I've recovered from Saturday's defeat, so just starting again for next week. But no, really good.
Yeah, it was a tough one to watch, particularly the second goal. I know that we've just done the sort of post-match podcast on it. We'll need to get you on for a proper podcast. That was Duncan's question when I put in the group chat, like, is it available on Thursday evenings at around about 8 o'clock or Sunday afternoons, as I usually go to. So we'll get you on that.
I am not knowledgeable about formations and all that sort of stuff. I would struggle when it got to that, but I can tell you how I felt watching the game. But when it gets to the whole formations and where to play people, I feel a bit clueless on that whole front.
That's all right. We're right there with you. Don't worry. We totally pretend with it, so we're absolutely fine. So we'll start off right at the beginning for you, Stephen. Just what was your journey like in terms of your first steps with the Rovers? Was it a family thing for you, or getting involved through school? How did you get involved with the Rovers?
No, it was a bit of a circuitous route for me, I've got to be honest. So I grew up in Glenrothes, but my family was from Belfast. So I was actually born in Belfast myself, moved here when I was 4 or 5, just 4.5. So had no family connections to Raith Rovers, didn't grew up in Glenrothes obviously, so wasn't even in the town of Kirkcaldy. And coming from Belfast, as you're not surprising, I said my dad wasn't into football at all, but did bring that kind of tribal allegiance, I guess, from Belfast, which not particularly not a thing that I'm keen on just now. But early years, I got into football just kind of watching football on TV. To be honest, my first game was the Hibs Rangers Scottish Cup final in 1979, which was 0-0, just because somebody gave my dad tickets. It was 0-0. It went to replays in those days, so I didn't even see the cup getting lifted. But Raith Rovers really came on my radar. I came probably kind of late 70s, early 80s, when first my brother started going to a couple of games just with people from school, and then obviously I went along as well, and started to get awareness of there was a club 7 miles down the road. Once I kind of got to an age where I thought I don't want anything to do with the old firm, Raith became my thing. So myself and a friend, it was actually a father of a friend who took me along for the first time to Starks Park. I for years I thought we'd beaten Clydebank 4-2 in my first ever game, and then always next season came out and I realised we actually got beat 4-2. So I had in my head that I was kind of lucky, but obviously I wasn't. But the minute I kind of got in the ground, experienced that game in the flesh, I think that kind of changed me. And as I said, I was probably getting to the age where I was kind of realising I wasn't that comfortable with the whole firm stuff. So Raith Rovers was the perfect place for me to go, and never looked back really. The minute, as I've written in the book at the end, never looked back once I got inside Starks Park, and I've been going ever since, through a lot of downs, a lot of ups, a few ups, a lot of downs. My first season ticket was 1983 Argentina season, when we got relegated in the last game of the season at Meadowbank, when we were through in Meadowbank watching that game. But no, it's become a bigger and bigger part of my life really over the years. Kept going, kept having season tickets, and kept supporting the club, and have recruited friends and family into supporting the club as well.
It's oddly reminiscent myself. You don't really see too many sort of first generation fans as such, because usually it is sort of, oh, my dad took me along there. So because I'm very similar to you. So
Yeah,
my friend's dad, when I was growing up, he took me to my first game against it was Airdrie at home. Keith Wright scored, so that would have been about 1997 or 1998 for that. And
right.
yeah, it's just it's funny that to think that there are those sort of parallels there, but. Yeah, pre 1995. Sort of what your experiences like being as a fan? Obviously, getting involved, as you say, you've had that sort of your first season being the centenary season. Had you just sort of been expecting after the 80s and the sort of, because that's really known as sort of the doldrums until sort of Frank Connor comes in and rejuvenates the club.
Yeah.
What your experience has been up pre 1990? Well, 1992 really, I guess.
Well, I mean, I guess reflecting on it now, it was a really bad period to join to become a Raith Rovers supporter. So I kind of think if you joined at that point and kept going, then you were really up for anything. But no, I mean, I actually feel very lucky to have joined when I did, because pre to Frank Connor coming in, and obviously Jimmy Nicholl after that, I'd kind of experienced the lows and what I thought was kind of it was my kind of normal, I guess, down in the kind of bottom tier. But I still loved it. I still loved going. Started going to away games. Loved the kind of away game experience and going on the supporters bus. And you know, it wasn't the greatest, but you know, there was moments in there like every season. Or you know, even if you're not going through a great time, there's always good moments. There was, you know, beating Stenhousemuir 9-2 in the second division, and then the next week losing 6-0 to Meadowbank. You know, so but those ups and downs, I just enjoyed. I enjoyed the kind of going with friends, you know, just experiencing it. But as I said, I feel very lucky that I actually had that kind of low. That once we got to the highs, it actually made me really appreciate it more. It wasn't just a case I was just stepping in when the club was doing brilliantly. It was actually, I'd seen the rise and I'd known how kind of bad it had been. And I think in a weird way that made the 90s even more special, I think, because I just wanted to savour it, because I knew it probably wasn't the norm. But yeah, Frank Connor was the real kick-starting of turning things around. So Bobby Wilson had been the manager. Then Frank Connor came in, and that was the real better players. You know, it's well documented. Obviously, my first book about how Frank was the kind of laid the foundation of the whole 90s success. And you know, he was a great character. And then the club just started winning. Got promoted on the last day down at Stranraer. I was on the pitch. I've still got a little bit of the pitch that I picked up that day. And you know, just those were kind of great moments. And obviously it just kept progressing after that with Jimmy Nicholl. But yeah, I was hooked right away and just loved it, and have loved it ever since.
That the game at Stranraer is a funny one, because I've got an anecdote, and it was before my time. Unfortunately, I didn't get down to see it, but my next door neighbour that I used to stay next to in Burnt Island, he was a Rovers fan. His wife had zero interest, and they had 2 kids together. I think I've probably told this on the podcast before. I'm not sure. I might have told it on KO 107 or so. But basically, it came down to that game in Stranraer, and I think it was Aaron Sterling also going for promotion spots. And he basically said to his wife at the time, he was like, "Can we go to Stranraer?" And she's like, "Nah, I want to go shopping to get this, that, and the other." And he goes, "But Stranraer's brilliant for shopping." So they drive all the way down to Stranraer. She gets out of Stranraer High Street and realises she's been absolutely done. He's off to the football, she's not speaking to him for a week after. Unfortunately, they both passed away. But just those types of sort of stories that you get about football, and that's the thing I love about it, just the sort of bonds that you get, and just the little anecdotes. It's like the stories of people going to Euro 96 and then going away for a pint of milk, and then they don't come back for 4 days and ended up in a divorce. Just those types of antics.
Well,
just need to make sure my girlfriend
memory of
doesn't
that game particularly
see any of this podcast, so that she's not thinking I've got any ideas in my head.
I was just going to say my memory of that game. I mean, obviously it was tense, you know, just waiting. I mean, it was the days of somebody with a radio and hoping for the best. I remember kind of Stranraer fans joking that kind of it was Ayr had scored and stuff. But we got back up the road, got back to Kirkcaldy, and I was with a few friends who kind of were at school with. and one of them had managed to get one of the champagne bottles from the Rovers players when we went on the pitch. Totally empty, obviously, but we were only like 16 at the time, so we were trying to get a bus back to Glenrothes. So like after getting back from Stranraer, and we're standing at Kirkcaldy bus station, and the woman bus driver wasn't going to let this guy on with this bottle. He's like, you can't bring that bottle open. She obviously thought it was, alcohol. And we were like, the five was trying to explain to her, no, this was from the Rovers getting promoted. And then I think she realised we were so daft that you just let him on with it. So I don't know if that's still in a cupboard somewhere in Glenrothes, but no, that was a great day. And actually, a lot of the fans, part of the new book was talking to fans. A lot of the fans are of a certain vintage that day holds a kind of special place in their hearts as well.
Yeah, I suppose that's probably a recurring theme with promotions, and we fortunately the early 90s we're lucky enough to get a few of them starting in 1992, 93, and then obviously the following season we get relegated. But then League Cup in 1994 starts in Dingwall. From a fan, what was it like to sort of see that experience? I mentioned this to John Greakin when I was interviewing him, but was there a moment when you realised this is the sort of lightning in a bottle? You've obviously said in your first book, Unthinkable, it's the improbable rise to the top of Scottish football for Raith Rovers. Was there a moment where you sort of realised, hold on, there's something special going on here, something bubbling away?
I think actually back in the 92-93 season, that was almost to me the best ever season for Raith Rovers. It sounds ridiculous because we won the League Cup and got promoted and 2 years later. But that squad, the way Jimmy Nicholl had them playing, Jimmy Nicholl himself playing, the players we had at that time, obviously your Cameron Crawford Dares coming through, your Gordon Dalziel, Peter Heatherston, Craig Brewster. That was just a really season where they kind of just got on a roll and never really stopped rolling, and obviously won promotion. So there had already been that kind of there's something really special happening here. Even in the Premier League, had kind of gone for it and not tried to be defensive, just had kept going for it. So some great days there. Like I remember particularly 2-2 at Ibrox was just amazing, and actually we should have won that day. But yeah, so the squad, the atmosphere that Jimmy Nicholl had created around the place was just incredibly special. So I think, I still didn't anticipate the cup run. I think it was only later on in the cup run, maybe as you got to the quarter-final, got drawn with Airdrie in the semi-final before you started to think, oh, wait a minute here. But yeah, it was just, you could tell there was something really good about the club. And as I said, having experienced the kind of 6-7 years before that, it was a sense of, this is just like a one-off and just enjoy it and just kind of go along for the journey.
So for you personally, you've written the 3 books now. Is writing something that you've always had sort of a fondness and an interest in, or is it something more born out of a desire to sort of keep memories alive, being able to sort of give people the platform to share stories?
It's a bit of both. I was always quite like writing and did a little bit. So I had, when the days of fanzines, I kind of dabbled in writing a few articles for the fanzines back in the day. I had written for the programme a little bit. So it was more just a kind of hobby, I think. But I think what kind of pushed me over the edge for this book, or for the first book, should I say, was that sense of actually Rovers have done something amazing here. And nobody's writing about it, Yeah. And I've said many a time, but at the time in the 90s, I lived in Glasgow, and I used to go into all these bookshops to look at the football section, and it was just Rangers Celtic, and even kind of really pedestrian players who you would have forgotten now had their kind of book of what they'd done in the game, So I just always felt there was a bit of a missing book in there that was about Raith Rovers for a start, obviously, because that's who I supported, but actually also about that squad. Having been there, having witnessed it, having seen how special it was, I just kind of thought these guys deserve, that story, is a great story for any football fan, obviously for Raith fans particularly, but for any football fan, even to this day, I'll speak to taxi drivers or bump into people on the way to a game on a train, and people reminisce about that squad and that time. So it was something that people were aware of, and I just thought, it kind of needs told, I think, and nobody else was telling it. So I thought, why not me? I mean, that decision was quite a difficult decision to get over the line, but it's funny, I was reflecting on it a while ago, and I'd actually read, I'm not going to name the book, but I read this other book about Scottish football in a bizarre way. It was so bad, I kind of thought, well, if that can get published, surely a book about Raith can get published. So it was that book that inadvertently pushed me over the line to go, do you know what? I'm just going to try and go for it and try and write this story, because the story wrote itself.
I mean, I'm sure that other fans of football clubs must look at our podcast that we've got going and say, we can do that. That's absolutely fine. But no, it's. I think that for Scottish football literature, it is a very interesting subject matter, in the sense that the one that always really stood out, and I've never read it, but I've seen it name checked quite a lot, is Ron Ferguson's Black Diamonds and the Blue Brazil. Doing the rounds. That's one that seems to get a lot of references. I know it's obviously a bit older now, but those sort of tales in terms of Cowdenbeath and where they were at, and that sort of hard luck story that they've obviously had across the years. But yeah, just we'll turn our eyes to the European adventure and that sort of basically going into that. How quickly, after sort of 1994, we go through the League Cup, we win the league, and then the summer comes, and then all of a sudden, how quickly did the sort of scale of the organisation dawn upon people about, okay, we need to actually start planning a trip to the Faroe Islands here? How do you do that? Because Tórshavn wasn't exactly the easiest place for people to be booking up to, I'd imagine, in the summer of 1995.
No, I mean, the main thing about it was all kind of the unknown for everybody. And even speaking to the players now, it was kind of the unknown for a lot of the players. Davy Kirkwood had played in Europe. Obviously a few others, Jim McInally, Alex Taylor had been around Dundee United in Europe. But for most of the Rovers players, it was an unknown. And certainly for us, it was a total unknown. So, and I think going back to it, I don't know what we didn't even know how the rounds worked or who was going to be in what round. It was all completely kind of unknown. But, when I went back to research the book and kind of think about what else was going on in the UEFA Cup, the teams that were in it, for younger supporters, obviously are used to the kind of Champions League kind of widened out. But in those days, it literally was just the champions in the European Cup, the forerunner of the Champions League. So in the UEFA Cup, you had everybody else. So you had Man United, Liverpool, Roma, Lazio, Barcelona, Benfica, Bayern Munich, obviously, Monaco, both AC Milan and Inter Milan were in it. So the scale of teams that are in it were absolutely huge. But again, we had no sense of kind of how it worked, who you were going to get. It was only really close to it once the draws started to happening. That you kind of realised that, okay, we're not going to get them now, but they might come in the next round. But everybody was thinking about, going to somewhere in mainland Europe and going somewhere hot. That was the kind of discussions that people were kind of having and talking about, of looking forward to it. So when we got Gutu and Trotterflag, it was a case of who, and actually, as I said to Raith TV the other day, people weren't even aware where the Faroe Islands were, and had no sense of it as a place. I think now people are much more aware of it and where it is and the type of environment it is. Back in those days, it literally was, where is this place? Like, let's try and find out where it was. Steve Wallace, who I spoke to as one of the fans in the book, talked about going to the bookshop in Kirkcaldy to look at an atlas and try and work out where it was, and found it. And then his immediate reaction was, how the hell do we get there? So it was completely the unknown, but thankfully there were people who were organising and wanted to take fans there, which kind of led all of us by the hand and got us up to the Faroe Islands.
Yeah, and I'm going to guess there was that real sense of fear of missing out, because, it could end very, very quickly, and this is the first time it's happened. You want it to happen again, but as we know now, it's not happened since. So I'm guessing that was sort of the prevailing spirit among people looking to get to that first tie.
Yeah, certainly. For me, I was very lucky. I was kind of in my early to mid 20s. So I kind of was out, I was working, which meant I had a credit card, which helped a huge amount through the 3 trips. But I kind of made the decision. For me anyway, personally, I thought this is a one-off. It's, as you said, it was lightning in a bottle winning the League Cup. actually the European place was going to be taken off that quite quickly after that. So I knew Raith Rovers in Europe is not going to be a regular thing. So I'd already made the decision that I'm going to go to, wherever it takes us. So, and that first one, I think there were a number of people who, because it was so remote, because it was so difficult to get to, kind of made a decision that, I'll wait and go to the next one. But I know certainly for myself and people like John Greer and others who kind of flew or took the ferry, there was a sense of, no, we want to be at the first one. We want to experience this. And I'm certainly glad I did, because it was kind of amazing.
Yeah, there's absolutely no stopping John Greer if he gets his mind to something, aside from maybe sprinklers, but that's by the by. But yeah, was it helped in the sense Rovers, they progress obviously with the tie, they win 4-0 at home. Did that maybe give a bit of reassurance to people that sort of, okay, we've done a labour there and we've managed to get a good home advantage, go to the Faroes and then I'll wait and see? Was that sort of something that was quite common, or were people sort of picked up by the pioneering spirit of the boat? What was your sort of ferry experience if you were on the ferry? Because I've heard plenty of tales.
Yes, I was on the ferry, unfortunately, but no, I think there was a mix. There was obviously people like myself and John who were determined to go to wherever it went. There were others who thought, right, 4-0, we're through, there will be another tie, and I totally understand that view as well, of kind of save yourself for the next round, which makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I as I said, I'd already made up my mind I wanted to go to every game. The ferry was, I always joke with John, he took the expensive option, he flew with us poor guys on the ferry for 25 hours. So, and again, in the book, I kind of talk about this, and part of the reason for speaking to fans was I kind of knew how good the fan experience was and how surreal it was as well. So I wanted to kind of capture that kind of weirdness of, on a Sunday morning gathering outside Stark's Bar, as it used to be, and getting on a bus to Aberdeen to go to the Faroe Islands, to get on a 25-hour ferry from Aberdeen, which was it was, again, just, I don't think any of us expected what was going to happen, or what we were going into. That ferry particularly, I've told the story before, but we got on the ferry, it was all excitement, the sun was shining in Aberdeen. We all went up the top of this ferry. It was a pretty kind of rudimentary ferry, but we went up the top, like a couple of guys got deck chairs and sat down, opened a can of beer, and we're thinking, this is great. This is just like a kind of cruise. And within 5 minutes, it was pouring with rain. The clouds came down, and then the boat started rocking. So it was like, right, let's get it. This is not kind of what we expected. And it was a totally surreal. You were sailing past oil rigs. Somebody said they thought they saw whales. You were on this kind of 30 fans with not actually that many other people on the boat, which was a bit odd. So there's a few people from oil and gas, a few kind of Faroese locals and families, but it was mostly kind of Raith fans. So, but it was great. It turned into a kind of evening long party, which helped pass a good chunk of that 25 hours.
I was going to say it's a real mix of cultures there. People from the likes of Torp Bain and Temple Hall mixing with those from Torshavn. It's definitely a real mix-up for the books.
There's a great story. A couple of the guys, spoke to the locals who were going back and ended up being invited round to their house for a meal, stayed overnight with them. Were walking the guy's dog the next day. So there was a real sense of camaraderie in it, and kind of welcoming as well of being there.
I feel like that's something that you would maybe expect to see on a YouTube channel nowadays from a travel vlogger. They'd probably be getting hundreds of thousands of views, but instead it's just people from Kirkcaldy out on their European football adventure, which of course, once in a lifetime experience. Now, by this point, the club, the squad that we had at the club had written themselves into the history books naturally. They've won the League Cup, a lot of experience in there. What's it been like to talk to those players for what was really a career highlight for many, just in terms of getting to know these people on that personal level and to be able to sort of interact with them? But given the sort of heroic nature and sort of the types of characters that were involved.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. And, that's, I guess, is one of my highlights of writing both books, is getting the opportunity to speak to these guys because, as anybody knows as a football fan, you kind of idolise the players, and if those players are doing something amazing, you idolise them even more. So getting to sit down with some of these guys, and for me, again, going back to my background from Northern Ireland, Jimmy Nicholl was a hero of mine even before he came to Raith Rovers for what he did with the Northern Ireland team in '82, so in '86. So getting to meet these guys and chat to them about football and about Raith Rovers, I mean, it still is an honour, and obviously for this book particularly, things like phoning Tony Rougier and chatting to Tony Rougier for an hour about what Raith Rovers means to him. But I think the main thing to say is all of the guys are, it sounds a cliche, but they're such a really lovely bunch of people, and there's obviously that warmth for everybody almost about Raith Rovers, and about particularly that time about Raith Rovers, and particularly about Jimmy Nicholl and Martin Harvey and the kind of environment they'd created. So even if people went on to do, far more spectacular things than what they did with Raith Rovers, there still is that warmth for that period of their career. And even though it's 30 years ago, that warmth just still persists. So getting the chance to kind of hear people's memories firsthand, and I guess that, to me, is what I've always made the core of my books, and this book as well, is for me, that's the real interest of hearing the players, hearing what they were thinking, getting a sense of who they are and kind of what they experience going through it. So yeah, it's a real pinch me moments all the time. I mean, this morning I was taking a book out to Danny Lennon. I'm going to be at Waterstones next week with him, so drove past Airdrie on the way to taking my daughter back to university, and just even meeting Danny Lennon for 5-10 minutes, I was slightly starstruck just handing him the book. So those sorts of moments are just amazing. To be able to kind of sit down and interview players and speak to them is great, and they've all been fantastic with their time and with their kind of openness and about talking about those years.
I think it's such a strange thing, because you hold them up in such high regard, and then a lot of the time you meet them and they're obviously just regular people. They've obviously go on in their lives and they've got everything going on, and it's so hard to get that out of your mindset. But you're this person that means so much in terms of the contribution you've had on the footballing pitch. So yeah, Rovers progress into I guess it was the first round proper at that point. Was there a sense of pride at getting through? I mean, by this point, I'd looked it up just earlier on there, just before we went live. 6 out of the 8 of the UK and Irish teams that entered the competition at the same point, including ourselves, in that preliminary round, went out, including Motherwell. So was there a sense of pride that Rovers had been able to get through that first hurdle and be able to make that through? Was that quite prevalent?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember when we got to Tofter Stadium in the Faroes, and I think, Motherwell must have played in the afternoon or something, so it kind of went round the ground. People were kind of saying Motherwell got knocked out because they'd lost in the home leg, and they won the away leg but went out on away goals. So there was even that sense of, right, we've got further than Motherwell. We're the furthest Scottish team in this tournament now. Because I think always there's a slight worry at the back of your mind of when you're going into that sort of level of competition, of how are you going to do here? You could just kind of crash out, and obviously over the years we've seen a lot of Scottish teams doing exactly that and crashing out really early. So I think we kind of knew we were through. Barring an absolute disaster that night, we knew we were through against Gutu. So to have gone further than Motherwell, to gone further than all those other kind of British and Irish teams, what was a huge thing, and just to kind of keep the journey going was great.
So we get the draw, and it's a Cranes of Iceland. Was there a degree of trepidation there from yourself, or were you just happy to be at the party still? What was your thoughts when that one came out?
Just again, it was a lack of knowledge, I think, to say, kind of my thing. I had no idea who they were. I had no idea who what play. I mean, people talked about Siggy Johnson, which obviously we knew, and obviously the twins. But again, you didn't really know how good they were. But no, I had no sense. Again, Icelandic football in those days, people didn't know a lot about it. There's you couldn't just go on internet or Wisecout and find out about these teams. And again, the main thing in people's head, and I've told the story a few times, but we were actually on the ferry when that draw was made, and I was sent up with a radio, like a little transistor radio, to try and get a signal to find out who had drawn. And by that point, we'd been enough. It'd been great fun being in the Faroes, but it was kind of bleak. It was kind of wet at Tofter Stadium. So we were like, right, again, we're going to be somewhere in Europe, Milan, Barcelona. And, finding out it was an Icelandic team from the top of the boat to coming back down to tell people, I'd forgotten the name of them. So I just knew it was a team from Iceland. So I told people that. And there was just stunned silence because everybody was obviously thinking, we're going to go somewhere warm. We've done our week in the Faroes. We're going to get some reward for this. And at that point, it didn't really feel like a reward to go further north. I mean, researching it and going back and looking about kind of who we could have got. I mean, there was some, because they used to do it in kind of geographical regions and little kind of pots of 8, mini pots of 8. So, I mean, in that pot, there was Leeds, there was Monaco, there was Brøndby, Sparta Prague, really top teams that probably would have knocked us out. So we probably got the weakest team in that group of 8, as did Akranos, to be fair. So us getting each other was a kind of bonus, I think. So, but again, just didn't have the knowledge at the time of who they were or how good they were until they actually came to Stark Park.
Yeah, it was really going to be my next question to you, the reaction to the draw itself, if there was any frustration from people that we maybe we didn't get a bigger name, because like you say, with the likes of Leeds United kicking about in the draw, and you see some of the teams that were involved. I know you mentioned, not necessarily in our region, but Lazio being involved. You've had Manchester United as well, were in at that point. They got Rotor Volgograd, who they got knocked out by at the next stage. So we even went one better than Manchester United that season, which is quite surreal to think.
Exactly.
Yeah. With the draw, 3-1 in the first leg, I'm going to guess that was cloud nine for the Rovers fans in Kirkcaldy, and just talk us through your experiences of that game. I know that when I spoke to John Greek, and he was mentioning it's slightly reduced in terms of that, the numbers on the ground, but just how did you feel coming away from that one?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of realise how good they were was the first thing. That was they were obviously a massive step up from Gutu, but it was a great night. I mean, it felt a lot more like a kind of proper European night, that game. I think the first time I got Gutu was obviously fairly early on in August, and so it was a kind of bright, sunny evening, whereas by the time we got to the Kranis game, it was kind of a bit later on in the year. It was darker, the floodlights were on. It was a really cracking atmosphere. I mean, reduced capacity, but it meant that Rovers fans were all around the kind of ground. So the Beveridge Park end was full of Rovers fans as well. So there was a cracking atmosphere. And I think actually because they were very good, that made it a real kind of ding-dong tie. And, go and win all that, brilliant. Their away goal, I think, was the kind of moment where everybody kind of, this, because obviously the away goal counted in those days. And to be fair, the Gunlegsson brothers were fantastic and were kind of running rings around the Rovers players at times. So to come out of that game to rally and get 3-1 was absolutely amazing. And I mean, obviously Barry Wilson's goal, even at 2-1, you kind of thought that's probably not enough. Whereas Barry Wilson's goal, even on that night, it felt really important and really crucial just to get that little bit of a gap in front. So, and to go up to Iceland with a 2-goal lead was huge. So, but yeah, really, really great special night. I mean, obviously, the next round we never played at Starks Park, so that was the kind of best European night at Starks Park, where there was just a great atmosphere. It was on TV that night, so you got home and could watch the game. Which I've still got on video somewhere, it was just that, it was that excitement of, right, we've got a chance here. We're going to go up to Iceland they're a great team, but we've got a real good chance to hold on to a 2-goal lead.
And at that point, is it slightly surreal as the sort of national media interest, probably across the UK, starts to gravitate because Rovers are going on this sort of European run?
Yeah, and again, being on TV, again, I remember going into work. I worked in Glasgow the next day, and people who had no interest in football were kind of mentioning that Raith had been on the TV and having watched the highlights of it. So, which for Raith, I mean, obviously they won the cup and been on the TV then, but it was still a relatively rare occurrence to have that kind of coverage of the club. So there definitely was a kind of heightened awareness of Raith and what they were doing, which was quite nice as well.
Absolutely. And then we come to the away leg. What did you make of, I'm going to ask everyone that's on, what did you make of Jimmy Nichols' formation I know that we said that we're not probably the best in terms of our formational knowledge, but that's a new one, I would imagine, for everyone involved.
Yeah, even not knowing very much about formations, I kind of knew there was something very odd going on when that game started. It was just, we'd had a really surreal time traveling over there, getting there, and then obviously the ground was something else as well. I mean, almost everybody I've spoken to for the book has mentioned, we'd had our capacity cut and there was a terracing at Starks Park, so that was deemed to be not appropriate. And then you got to Iceland and it was just a grass bank and people were sitting with like picnics and stuff. So there was a sense of, hold on a minute, like why are they cutting our capacity when, people are watching from a grass slope? A bit like the behind Lithgow with the goals. But,
I was going to say, does it give you flashbacks if you go to Linlithgow?
Yeah, I mean, it does. And there was a sense of injustice about it. As in, almost everybody was like, hold on a minute, why are they cutting? But we were in this little stand. It was at first a really party atmosphere. I mean, the whole day was a kind of party atmosphere, but particularly travelling over there was still that sense of we've no idea where we're going. We've no idea what we're going into. Arriving at that ground, there was a kind of really kind of dramatic mountain behind one side, and then another side was the water. So you were in this kind of really different landscape, and then the game was just. I've never been at a more one-sided game with Rovers, and that's even playing at Celtic Park and Ibrox. I've never seen the Rovers just absolutely up against it. He obviously decided. I mean, that was one of the kind of real treats was speaking to Jimmy Nicholl about kind of why he made that decision to go so defensive, because that was never his kind of instinct, But he just thought the Gunlausen brothers could turn people really easily. They were so quick, so fast, a lot of kind of triangles and passing. So he just thought, stick six at the back, basically, a back four with two sweepers behind them, but it just meant you couldn't get out. Stevie Crawford was supposed to be up home, leading the line, but he just became another defender, really. So it was but the first half was good, 0-0 at half time. We still had our 2-goal lead. It was when they scored that things really became fraught. And watching that game, if ever you would have wanted to watch a game through the kind of your fingers, that would have been the game, because it just felt like there's a goal coming here, and that goal would have absolutely knocked us out and removed any possibility of playing Bayern Munich. So amazing to get through.
Sounds like definitely one where the second half time would have slowed down. I think we've all had that experience where your team scores. I remember in particular, not the same gravitas, but it's still important for me, was the Dundee away game when Mark Campbell was out before the game in the Scottish Cup quarter-final, was it? To get to the semi-final.
Yeah.
Because we scored so early, the second half in that game felt like it went on for about basically three halves of football. It took that long. So I can only imagine what it was like watching the high stakes of European football.
It was exactly like that. And again, the support that day really got behind. I've never been in a crowd. I've been in some great Rovers crowds, obviously, but the way everybody kind of almost sobered up immediately, but actually thought this is important and kind of kept behind the team the whole way. But by the last 10, the last 10 minutes felt like 2 hours. And they were, there was balls kind of whistling past the post. Scott Thompson made some amazing saves. He was fantastic that day, but it just had that sense of this is going to go in, and it would have been crushing, if it had have done. But thankfully it didn't.
Yeah, I've been fortunate enough to meet Scott Thompson, and just one thing that really strikes me about him is just this humility and how humble he is about the whole sort of European run. And just what have your experiences like been with him? Because again, just with that type of character, you're obviously getting the anecdotes as well, but he also downplays sort of the role he's played to a degree, just acknowledging it's very much a team sport.
Yeah, absolutely, and he's not someone to kind of take the credit for anything, So it was a funny when I met him. He's obviously a goalkeeping coach at Ross County, so he said, "Oh well, we can meet up when I come down to Edinburgh." So I met him at Malmaison, which is where Ross County stays. So he came down his kind of Ross County tractor. But yeah, really lovely guy, really humble, And, kind of was almost, I was just doing my job. You witnessed, I was there, I witnessed kind of one of the greatest goalkeeping performances ever. And he was just like, yeah, I was just kind of doing what I'm kind of put there to do, was to keep the ball at the net, which obviously he did. But, absolutely fantastic. And I think he was promised a bonus that day. I'm not sure if it ever materialised, but he would have absolutely deserved it.
Yeah, absolutely. Got 3 words for you next. Keflavik International Airport. What comes to mind for you when I mention those? Because it seems to be this. I said this to John Grayson. It feels like for a lot of the attention goes onto the Munich scoreboard and everything that happened in the third game. A lot of the core memories seem to have been mentioned around the airport experience of the players. It might have been the players or the fans' flights delayed. And then you've just got everyone mingling, this big party atmosphere at the airport. What was your experiences like with that?
Yeah, I mean, there is a chapter in the book called The Airport. So it's probably giving you an insight into how important I thought it was. No, I mean, I write in the book is kind of, you have these great moments in the history of Raith Rovers that are, in the, winning promotion, winning cups. And, you look at a list of what we've achieved in our honours list, it's there. To me, the airport was almost should be on that list, because it was the fact that it actually got through against a really strong team was absolutely huge. And there then was that realisation of, right, we will get someone big in the next round, because there was hardly any, there was almost no, we were the small team left. Everybody else was a kind of European juggernaut. So you were going to get someone amazing. We'd had this mad 24 hours of kind of flying over there, going to the game, the kind of emotions of the game. And my abiding memory of it is just when the team came in. So we were queued up, kind of waiting to get our boarding passes or whatever. And the team obviously arrived slightly later than us and kind of walked into the terminal, and it was just spontaneous kind of cheering and clapping, which was just amazing. It was kind of hairs on the back of your neck standing up. And then it's such a small airport that everybody was together. And it summed up Raith in that era. I think that everybody was kind of part of it, and everybody was, it was a kind of different era in terms of how players reacted with fans. Obviously with Jimmy Nichols' team, there was a kind of work hard, play hard attitude. So even in the promotion runs, they went out in the town, mingled with fans, went to Jackie O's with fans, these sorts of things. So that it just encapsulated all of that. We just achieved something incredibly special, and I think everybody realised it. And there was almost no them and us. It was just, we're all Raith Rovers. Even if you'd just been there watching it or been on the pitch actually making it happen, it felt like everybody was part of it, and everybody. So, people do talk about it a lot. It was a really, really special moment, and definitely one of the kind of highlights of the whole European adventure.
Absolutely. And in the book, you spoke to both a go-to player, I believe, and an Akranes fan. Yeah. What was it like from their perspective in terms of being able to chat to them? Because this is obviously, it's a sort of footmark in their history from sort of a time gone by. But then also you've kind of got that universal love for football. I'm just back from my holiday, and in the most bizarre of circumstances, I was sitting outside pub, I think it was, and basically there was a guy in a Coventry shorts, and we ended up talking about Fank de Dabble, as you do, because you find that sort of common bond between clubs. You sort of think, I've had a player with their club, chat about that. What was your own experiences like with that, given the sort of time that's gone by, and how was it to chat with them?
Yeah, it was really, really great. I mean, the first, in terms of they were slightly different in the sense, obviously, for Guto Trotterflag, it was a player. But again, for John Peterson, he was coming through at that time as a striker, and he was fairly young, but he played in both games. He went on, he was the guy that kind of scored 2 against Scotland and got them a 2-2 draw, in which Bertie Vogts got sacked after it. But so he has kind of fond memories of playing in Europe at that point, because it was quite new to them. The fellas had just, they were only in European competition 2 or 3 years. So he remembers it really fondly. Didn't have any great expectations of getting through. Kind of knew that Scottish football was stronger than Faroese football in those days, particularly. So there was no expectation of getting through. They were delighted to have drawn 2-2 with us, actually. That was one of the kind of best results for a Faroese team at that. But so he's got fond memories of, and Gutu doesn't exist anymore, so they merged with another team. So again, he's got that sense of, well, that's where it all started for me, and those games against the Raith Rovers were kind of part of that. So he has that fond memories. For the Cranis fan I spoke to, Brynjar for, maybe not so positive memories, but again, really, really great to chat to him, because he's kind of my age. He's a fan of his team, still is to this day. So there's that connection there. As he summed up at the end of our conversation, he's like, he said he loves football. He loves when teams go on a run and do something special. But I added it with I just wish you hadn't done it against us, was his kind of final words. So, but for him, Raith Rovers means something different. It means a kind of disappointment of that, because where they were at in their journey, they were kind of in the middle of winning 5 in a row in Iceland, which was unheard of, and I don't think it's been repeated. So it was their kind of golden generation, and they'd started winning in Europe. So playing us was a real opportunity for them as well to get to that next stage. So for them to miss out in the kind of circumstances where they did totally dominate us for 90 minutes and just couldn't get the second goal. He obviously still is a lingering regret for them. But I just wanted to bring in a kind of different given those two teams we played were so kind of, unknown and different. I wanted to bring in a kind of perspective from both. And particularly the Akranis one was fascinating, because obviously I went there, had a great time, we got through. That's all I thought about. So hearing it from someone else's side and where they were, it was really interesting for me just to kind of get that sense. But yeah, no, it's great, and obviously they're still going.
Yeah, I mean, you never think about yourself in football in the sense of being the villain of someone else's story. It's a strange way to think about it, but it's true. Like, there's always a fan on the other side that's been at a cup final and you've won, and I suppose you see it quite a lot with Celtic fans. Like, the lowest point in our history was Raith Rovers in 1994, and you're like, that was a great day. I don't know what you're on about.
What you're talking? Well, he was funny, because I said to him, well, kind of what does Raith Rovers mean to you? And he's going, let's just say it doesn't fill me with joy, And he actually said, there's 3 games that are my most disappointing kind of Akranis in Europe. He said one, when I was 9 years old, we got beat 9-0 by Sporting Lisbon, young kid, really disappointed. And he's like, and the other 2 are both games against Raith Rovers. So, you don't think of it. Obviously our high was their low, but he was really gracious and kind of talking to me and giving me his background on Akranis and talking to what that town meant and what the team meant to the town, which it still does to this day. So hopefully that's a kind of interesting perspective for people to read as well.
Yes, and from the Akranis game, we then move on to the title, the lead, and the sort of the fanfare that came with it. What was your own reaction to the draw for the next round and everything that came with it?
Yeah, I mean, it was just amazing, really. I mean, it was kind of what you'd been waiting for and what you'd kind of dreamt of all the way through. And as you said earlier, Man United had gone out that night in when we were winning in Iceland. Monaco had gone out, Inter Milan had gone out, so we'd got further than some really heavyweight teams. So you were waiting on the draw. You wanted somewhere in mainland Europe. You wanted, for me, I wanted the biggest name possible, really. And when Bayern Munich came out, that was kind of, a realization of those dreams. And even the players kind of talk about that of, I think Gally Graham used the phrase, the superstars are coming, just that squad. Bayern Munich with its just kind of all-star squad at that point, had Klinsmann, had Papan. So the thought of Raith kind of going up against those sorts of guys was just incredible, really. And it felt like, having been to the Faroes, having been to Iceland, it definitely felt like the kind of reward for having made those journeys and gone through those experiences, that actually now we've got the big one, which was just amazing. And the excitement and buzz around the town and even around Scottish football just started right away, really, once that draw came out.
So we play the first leg at Easter Road. What was your experiences like from that, going to Edinburgh to watch the game there?
Yeah, well, by that point I had moved to Edinburgh, so again,
Right.
I mean, it's a great now. It's a regret now, I think, that it wasn't at Stark Park, obviously. I think at the time, being honest, that wasn't so much. I was almost just like, we're playing Bayern Munich, we're playing at Easter Road. There'd been a debate about the stadium all the way through of whether it was suitable. For me, Easter Road, as I said, I lived in Edinburgh. It was like, well, great. It's not, I can get the 35 bus straight down Easter Road to it. But yeah, it was just excitement, really. And, a little bit, I guess, how I felt going into the League Cup final. I sort of thought, well, this could be tricky, it could be. I had really no expectations of kind of getting through the tie or winning by that point, I think. I mean, you always never know, and you always go in with a bit of belief. But again, even speaking to some of the players and some of the other fans, there was general sense of kind of, this is probably where our journey is going to end. It'd be a kind of amazing result to get past Bayern Munich. And Raith Rovers at that point were doing amazing things, but I think that would have been the most amazing of all. But yeah, just excitement and going down to that game, the build up to it. Again, it was live on TV, which was a huge thing. I just remember going for a drink halfway down Easter Road. I think it was at Middleton's. Again, there was Bayern Munich fans in there. Just the excitement of the whole thing. There was a lot of kind of neutrals went to that game as well. And there was just a huge, huge, big atmosphere in the build-up to it, and actually on the night when the teams were kind of piped out from the tunnel. It really was incredible.
Yeah, Easter Road, just naturally a good place for Rovers fans, I feel, over the years, after the Ramsden's Cup and the game against Hibs there as well that same season. A lot of happy memories, I think, at that stadium for a lot of our fan base. But then what was the trip to Germany like? Just getting that organised. I mean, obviously, you've gone to the first two legs and then you're like, right, definitely getting along for this one. How did you see it through that way?
Yeah, well, it was kind of easier because it was Germany. It was somewhere you knew. It was somewhere you could fly to. I ended up, that was the one trip I didn't do with kind of other fans and other people at the club. We had friends that kind of lived just outside Munich. So took the opportunity to go out kind of on the Saturday before the game, visit them, stay with them, and then just kind of travel in and out of Munich for the days before the game and of the game as well. So it was slightly different in that sense for myself. But yeah, it was really great. I mean, the day of the game, being in the centre of Munich, other Rovers fans, and it was definitely a step up in the number of people who had gone. So I think the first game, it was definitely less than 60 who'd kind of gone to the Faroes. Iceland, it was a lot more, but it was still only around the 200 mark who'd kind of gone there. By the time you got to Munich, it was like 1,500, I think, is the number that most people have estimated. So, to have that travelling support in another country, and around the town was great. The build up to it was really great. And I think by that point, because we kind of lost 2-0 at Easter Road, there was a sense of the pressure's off here. It's just, we're probably not going to win 3-0 in Munich. So just let's go and enjoy it, enjoy what it brings, and, kind of limited expectations, which once we get onto the game, I think even added more to the enjoyment of what actually did happen and how it did unfold. But yeah, it felt like going back to what I said before, it felt like the reward of this is what we all hope for when we qualified for Europe.
What I find interesting about the Bayern Munich game in particular is that we go in and we take the lead, and there's definitely stories out there about it, but I just feel like, as you say, like before, it's kind of not really been recorded. Everyone will have their own experiences, which is the great thing about this book coming out, is the fact that you're going to have everyone being able to have their piece and be able to say. So what was that like to watch your team? You've grown up in Glenrothes, you've gone through the 80s, and you've watched Raith Rovers in the doldrums, and then they've gone and they've won a League Cup. And then they go to a European superpower. And it can't be understated, it was two tricky ties in Europe beforehand. And then we go to Munich and we take a lead. What was that like? Because, again, I didn't get to experience this. So how was that for you?
Yeah. It just was the best. I mean, it was surreal, I think, is the other thing. I mean, the thing that's come through this whole book and when writing it, and the two previous journeys, like everything about it was almost surreal. The places we went, the kind of weird experiences that people had, the weird ways we got there, the weird places we ended up in to get to Munich was surreal. And then to be in the Olympic Stadium, which obviously was such a famous venue for Germany games, for Olympics. You've seen it on the TV numerous times. To actually be playing them was almost surreal and almost unbelievable. And actually, if you rewind a little bit, the Ronnie Coyle sliced down somebody and gave away a penalty right in front of us, and we just thought, right, here we go, 1-0. And Jean-Pierre Papin stepped out and absolutely ballooned it over the bar. And even that was amazing. That felt like, right, I just thought that was going to be the highlight of the night. I thought that feels like a goal. And it was celebrated as almost if it was a goal. So that was hilarious. And then, my one regret, I think, about the whole thing was we were way at the other end. And I don't know if you've ever been to Olympic Stadium, but it's way worse than Hampden. There's a massive running track around it. We were kind of right up the back of the Rovers section. So it literally was miles away where the free kick was being taken. But I think that added to it. And Sean McGuigan, who I spoke to for the book, talks about this moment being one of his favourite, of just that kind of delay as people processed it and realised what had happened. Because it was so far away, the free kick was taken. I think because of the deflection kind of confused people as well. Because it didn't just go straight in. It kind of just, suddenly it was in the net. But there was like a second's delay, and it was absolutely incredible. It was a mix of celebrating and almost laughing at the same time. Just almost, this is ridiculous. How have we taken the lead? How are we kind of suddenly back in this tie? And then the best thing about it now, reflecting on it, was just we had the whole half time just to enjoy it and to just revel in that kind of moment. And it generally was fantastic.
It's iconic. There's no other way to put it. It's just gone down in the sort of annals of footballing history as to that photo and what it means to people. And I think any sort of football supporter would want that in terms of their club, to be able to look at that and have that moment, even though you know what's coming in the second half, and you look back and just so surreal to look at and to view, even though I wasn't there, just as a fan of the club, just to have that as part of our history and to be able to talk to the people that have been there. Danny Lennon, obviously, we get the goal. Is it just quite surreal to be sort of having conversations with him? You say you nip by his house to drop off a copy of the book. You're going to be doing a sort of conversation with him 16th of October, 7 p.m. down at Waterstones on Kirkcaldy High Street. You were saying earlier on that 15 tickets or so remaining for that. So if you are listening to this, and
so there's been good interest in it. Yeah. So there's probably about 10, 15 tickets remaining for that. It's totally free. Just have to contact Waterstones or go down to the store and kind of put your name down for it. So it'll be myself and Danny Lennon. Obviously, I'll do a wee bit of an intro, but it's mostly about talking to Danny Lennon about his career, his time at the Rovers, and obviously that moment, which was amazing. And again, just speaking to the other players as well about how they felt about when that goal went in, obviously being down on the pitch and kind of the kind of surrealness of it, and obviously the half time. Jimmy Nicholl in the dressing room at half time is a kind of really well known story. So again, it covers that. But yeah, it was just, again, it was a mixture of celebration and disbelief, and I think that's what I remember about it particularly, is just almost just joy, unbridled joy. And I've told the story a few times, and I'll probably tell it at Watersons. But I was standing at the top of the concourse at half time, and this quite old guy came up to me, a Rover supporter, and he grabbed my hand, like really intently looked at me, and he's like, "We can beat these bastards." And I was just thinking, that belief. And to me, I kind of laughed it off because I didn't have that belief. I thought, well, Bayern Munich will probably beat us, but just that belief, and for that team to have taken us to that level of football, and to taken people to a moment where they actually thought, do you know what, we can do Bayern Munich here. We're in this game. We can beat them. Even if it didn't transpire, to me, that is what the beauty of this story is about, is that belief and that hope and that possibility that actually a lot of the guys that were there, including myself, still carry to this day, that it doesn't matter how grim it can get, how bad it is, it can always change, and kind of spectacular things can happen. And that's what keeps me going, certainly, supporting Raith to this day.
Yeah, I think it's kind of double-edged in the sense that you've got the humanisation of these sort of football players back at that point. You mentioned Jean-Pierre Papin skying the the ball over the bar from the penalty, and you're thinking, oh, what's happened there? And then, of course, it goes on to watching our players become legends and the stories that get told, and you're thinking, there might just be a chance. It's kind of the Dumb and Dumber meme, isn't it? It's kind of, so you're saying there's a chance. It's, yeah. So after the game, what was it like for you to come out? Naturally, there's that sense of pride after the game. Bayern scored the additional 2 goals in the second half, but that's not going to diminish away from the sort of success that Rovers have had in Europe and the run that they went on. What was that like for you to watch, just the pride, and then just after the game, what was the immediacy of that like?
Yeah, I mean, it was huge pride. I mean, there was a kind of special moment when the players, a lot of them had swapped strips with the Bayern players, so they came up to the crowd and kind of joined arms and raised their arms, and there's a kind of great photo of that, which is in the book as well, of the players lined up, and that was just a really special moment. I mean, actually, when I start the book, I kind of have brought it right up to date in terms of the kind of season we ran Dundee United close. So I guess when we lost up at Ross County in the playoffs, up in Dingwall that kind of morning, on the Sunday morning, there was echoes to me of Munich, of just kind of, yeah, you've not quite got where you wanted to get to, but what a journey, and how great was that journey, and how enjoyable was that journey. And to me, that kind of that parallel with Munich felt the same of, yeah, we're not through, we're out. If you look at it on paper, it's failure, you're out of the UEFA Cup, but actually anybody who was there knew it was anything but failure. They'd given us those 2 ties, had given us that moment of belief that actually we're back in this. They'd given them a fright, which in reality was given the squad was all probably the peak of what they could possibly do. And, they hadn't been hammered. They hadn't been hammered. They'd kind of performed really well against them, which, as they went on in the tournament, started hammering everybody, it kind of even brought that into more perspective. But yeah, just sheer pride. As I said, we were staying with friends, so a bit of a regret didn't go out in Munich after. We kind of just had to go back to the southern kind of suburbs. So if they do it again, I definitely would have gone out and celebrated in Munich. But yeah, it was just, everything about it was just pride. And coming back, into the Premier League was just a sense of what a great adventure that was, and how enjoyable it was. And if as I said, if people weren't there and fans of other clubs could be a bit sniffy about, well, it's a half-time scoreboard, does it mean anything? But actually it means absolutely everything if you understand Raith Rovers and understand us as a club and where we'd got to at that point in time. It's absolutely to be celebrated, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing about football clubs. Everyone's always keen to kick the boot into their rivals or clubs about that, isn't it? It's kind of like you could be driving a Ferrari, but someone will tell you it's not a 2025 model, and that's it's not good. So it's the romanticism of football, really, though. I think that's kind of the heart of the story in itself. I mean, for me, you've written 3 books and hugely emotive topics. Both Raith Rovers and Scotland's women's team, very successful in terms of their journeys that they've had in the areas that you've covered. How's that been for you? What's that been like, just to get to know these people and to be able to sort of listen to the anecdotes that have been involved both on the international and on the domestic level?
Yeah, it's a huge privilege. I mean, for me, again, I am just a fan first. So, you even said, I did an interview with Raith TV and they put up on it author, and I kind of thought, what, So to me, I'm just a fan who loves this club, loves football generally, whether that's Scotland men or Scotland women. So to be able to kind of write about it is just a real honour for me. And, going back to that meeting some of these people who were my absolute heroes, particularly on not so much in this book, but particularly in the first book, I was kind of, at times I had to stop myself going, I love you, you're great, In some of these interviews, I had to be professional and kind of leave it to the end of the interview to just go, thanks for I really loved you when you played and stuff, But that's how I feel kind of to this day. As I said, met Danny Lennon today. It was just like, this is a real honour for me to kind of, to be kind of sitting at Waterstones next week, chatting to him about his career, again, will be a huge honour for me. So, yeah, and I think you picked up a word there, just emotional. I think, again, go back to the formations and how you watch football. I love the emotions of watching football. So it's it's those highs and those emotional moments that I particularly cherish. So And I'm not a historian, so as I've said, there's obviously always next season, and people are much better at me than kind of capturing the absolute ins and outs of everything that's happened. This book and my others are hopefully more just a kind of flavour of what it was like to be at Raith Rovers at that point, and the emotions of that. And I think both from the player side and for this one from the fan side. And in this book, I do kind of go beyond Munich, as I said, and talk about how it unravelled, because that's part of the story as well, Maybe not the greatest bit of it, but I think that's of interest as well, of just how quickly it kind of almost unravelled and disintegrated a little bit, and where players went after that. But I think, again, one of the key messages for me is the people who are still there are the fans who went on those trips. So whether it's John Greer doing his Reminiscent Raith, or doing all the great stuff about capturing the history and working with the former players, Steve Wallace on the board of the trust, still going along, Graham from the podcast, still fundraising for the club, doing this podcast, everywhere, whether it's Quinny doing Rock the Rovers, all of these fans who were there and on that journey are still at the heart of the club and are still supporting and still doing their kind of absolute best for Raith Rovers. And that's why I almost kind of wanted to, it's only a selection of fans obviously I've spoken to, but hopefully that selection of fans kind of represents us all that support the club, that actually the supporters are just as important as the players here in terms of this club, and a club particularly of our size, I think. So that's probably another kind of theme that I've tried to capture with the book, is to give not just the players but the fans their kind of place, and actually they did it as well and they're still there doing it.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my next sort of point. I'm guessing that you can get a sort of sense of the gratitude from these people when you're chatting to them, because everyone's going to have their own story, everyone's going to have their own tale, their own memories. John in particular, a lot of the time he'll talk about the scars out the window. It's his sort of anecdote that he goes to. Absolutely love. I could listen to John Greer all day. He's absolutely fantastic, some of the stuff that he comes out with.
John's anecdotes are in there.
Yeah, it's unsurprised. But yeah, do you just get that sense of being able to give these people their space and time to be able to have that sort of platform, that sort of soapbox, to be able to tell their side of the story and an important part of history?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, and I wanted to do that. And again, that was huge amount of fun, because obviously, as I think I've said elsewhere, this for me was the time when it started to really connect me with other fans. So, you met people like Steve Wallace on the ferry and Kenny Smith on the ferry. You travel with other people, and they give you that real sense of kind of community, which I love about Raith Rovers. But so what I've done in the book, as I said, I thought long and hard about how to kind of represent the fans. And as I said, it's unfortunate you can't kind of cover everybody who travelled, which I would have loved to have done. But what I thought was to do, I'll kind of pick people from around the club, different bits of the club, and kind of tell their story. And not just about what they remember about Munich or the Faroe Islands or Iceland, but actually tell a little bit about their story of how they started supporting Raith and how they kind of got into it. And again, one of the things that struck me when I did that is there's so many kind of sliding doors moments of where people ended up and how people ended up at Raith Rovers. And, a bit like my own story, if there wasn't a connection there, but you kind of, something happened that got you down to Starks Park. And, there are a few sliding doors moments like that, but now these people are kind of a huge part of the club and it's a huge part of their lives as well. And, I think importantly, I've given them a lot back. I mean, I always say I can kind of never repay what Raith have given me over the years, even in those kind of difficult moments or all those seasons that weren't particularly great, which there's quite a few, obviously. But again, what the club's given me in a kind of place and a home, and I know the club use you belong, but it's absolutely true. I think of it as actually a place. Particularly for me, I think not being from Fife originally, family not being from Fife and not even being from Kirkcaldy, that connection to kind of the area and the community is just huge. And, obviously my family have started coming along. My daughter was mascot of the Ramsden's Cup final, walked out onto the pitch with that, as obviously has played at Starks Park as well when she played football. So these connections, I think, to the club are really, really important. So it's nice to be able to kind of tell the fan stories in the same way as the player stories as well, and give people that kind of space and also recognition.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the interesting sort of legacy that comes out, particularly of the last few seasons where they've introduced the sort of free season tickets for under 12s, because it feels like a lot more families. I'm seeing a lot of people that I went to school with that are bringing their sort of young kids now along to games. So it'll be interesting to see sort of the knock-on effect that has over time into these people. Because a lot of the people that you do know, they sort of come along with free tickets from the schools, and that's how I got involved. With my friend's dad taking me along, just having that opportunity there. So keen to see how that goes. A few more questions just before we wrap things up. If you could go back and relive any part of the European experience, what do you think you would pick in terms of your choice moment, or is that too difficult to choose from, Stephen?
No, I think it's a bit like the League Cup run. It's funny. I would have to say my absolute favourite Raith moment, bizarrely, is Brian Potter saving the penalty in the semi-final. If I had to relive any Raith moment, it wouldn't be the final; it would be the semi-final. And I actually feel the European is a bit like that as well. So I think, I guess where I have huge fond memories of being in Munich, of the goal. Obviously, I've got great memories of being on that ferry, staying in the Faroes for a week, around that game. But the Iceland game, I think, just the final whistle in Iceland and then following that up with the airport, I think for me was the kind of the peak moment of it. It was just that, that got us Munich, that got us those two ties against Bayern Munich, and just the high of that. And it obviously, I was going to say it was a win. It wasn't a win in Iceland. We got beat 1-0, but overall in the tie, it was a win, So although the Lennon goal was amazing, that half time was amazing, I think the kind of the sense of Iceland of getting through the final whistle, and also maybe a bit going back to the League Cup semi-final, that there was more to come, that there was actually still something. There was another part of the journey to look forward to. So I think Iceland was probably my favourite kind of moment, that the relief at that final whistle when it finally went.
Rightfully so. Graham Meldrum, you've spoken to him as part of the book. He was asking, were there any stories that you couldn't publish, any that weren't able to make it to the book, that you're able to tell?
I'm not sure. I think I probably could have published them, but again, it's the difficulty was there's so many stories and getting the space in the book for that as well. I mean, obviously on all three trips there was a lot of alcohol taken, so there was a few stories around that. But yeah, it was the hardest part, I think, was just picking what stories were, to put in and which ones there was space for. And I guess that was the kind of challenge of getting that in the flow of the book and what I was trying to say with each chapter. But there wasn't any that were so horrendous that they couldn't be published. Well, not that I was told anyway. I'm sure there were things that went on, but no. I mean, as I said, it was all surreal. I mean, Graham had a great line of it when he talked about being in Iceland, saying it was like, in the nicest possible way, it was idiots abroad. And to be fair, that feels like the whole trip was just not in a bad way, but we just didn't know what we were doing. It was new. We were having a laugh. It was hugely enjoyable. It was hugely surreal. And actually that was what was brilliant about it. We had no clue, and we were just going through and experiencing it as it came, and thankfully it panned out and unfolded in a great way, in almost the best way possible.
So for you, is there any sort of personal favourite anecdotes that jump out for you that have came through from it?
Yeah, I think just the way the players, there's a chapter on kind of the environment. Quite early on, there's a chapter about the environment that Jimmy Nicholl and Martin Harvey had created, and players talking with such warmth about that. So I think to hear that, and obviously that was a huge part of the success. I should say I've spoken to a kind of range of players, so obviously the kind of big names who scored the goals, who were getting the headlines in those days, but also kind of other players that were coming through at that time. So the likes of Barry Wilson, Robbie Rayside, a bit younger, even kind of Gordon Forrest and Graham Robertson, who were kind of young apprentices. Again, just trying to capture that. And they were particularly strong on kind of Martin Harvey and Jimmy Nicholl and how they felt, made you feel part of it, made you feel included, and it didn't matter whether you were, Stevie Crawford or Gordon Dalziel, and earlier than that, scoring the goals, or just an apprentice. You were part of the club. So that kind of warmth, I think, was hugely important. But a personal favourite of mine is just is the ferry stories and just being on the ferry and the kind of surrealness of being on that 25-hour ferry. When we were queuing up to come back on the Friday, everybody had kind of had enough by then. I think a lot of them had been out of the kind of Faroese equivalent of Jackie O's the night before as well. And everybody was kind of a bit raggy getting back on this ferry, not looking forward to the journey. And somebody said, never mind, guys, this time tomorrow, we'll still be on the ferry. And it was just an absolute groan of 25 hours of sailing ahead of us. But yeah, Steve Wallace said, all he remembers about the ferry was Crooked Jack, Gull Beer and the Tambourine. So there's a chapter called Crooked Jack, Gull Beer and a Tambourine, and that was just it was the start of it all. It was the start of that adventure, and it was just, again, a whole lot of laughs and a lot of singing.
I do like how the only knowledge of Faroese drink I have is from lager from the early 90s, Gull Beer. But yeah, with yourself, you've turned in terms of writing. You've obviously done 3 books now, as I say. What would be your advice to give to anyone that's potentially thinking about sort of getting into that line of sort of starting to write things down, being able to jot things down, or be able to, whether it's doing pieces for programs, whether it's potential looking in terms of like, okay, can I go on, do blogs, books, etc.? What would be any advice that you've got?
I think just give it a go. I mean, I think I've found, particularly with the first book, the hardest thing was kind of making the decision just to give it a go. And, and will this be any good? I guess is a doubt. So even with this book, you get the book and you think, right, okay, I feel I've done an okay job with it, but I guess the proof is in the pudding of people reading it and enjoying it. So there's always that slight doubt in my head of like, is this any good? But I think just taking a chance and actually doing it. As I said, it was a particularly bad book that kind of pushed me over the edge to think I can maybe do this. But it was a big leap to go, actually, what am I doing here? And, am I going to be able... For me, I interview people at work, so I knew I could do the interviewing bit of it. So that made it a lot easier for me because I thought, I know I can interview people and get stuff out of them and get their stories out of them. It's whether I can kind of piece that together. But yeah, I think just give it a go, try it. I mean, the other bit of advice I'd say is get someone you trust to kind of read it and help you. I should give a huge shout out to my wife, Elaine, who was in the Faroes, didn't go to Iceland, was in Munich. But for all 3 books, it's been a case of me drafting it, a first draft, giving it to her, trusting her to let her read it, and that kind of outside... Because the difficulty is you interview people, you have favourite anecdotes, you've got favourite kind of moments, and you get attached to things. But sometimes they're not the right thing for the book or the chapter or whatever it happens to be. So, I think give it a go. And if you can get someone to kind of an outside who you trust to kind of, obviously that's can be difficult, but to find someone who can kind of give you a thought on it and listen to that, and you can start to shape it like that. But yeah, absolutely. Just if you enjoy it, just give it a go. And I think the great thing now is there's so many avenues for people to do blogs, even to do the kind of video blogs that we're seeing, podcasts like yourselves. It's absolutely fantastic addition to kind of following Rovers. So it just shows you that if you kind of get out there and do it, you can make a real difference and kind of benefit people, hopefully.
Yeah, certainly with my experience of the podcast, it was just, I think the big thing was just sort of asking the question when I mean, it's just over 2 years since we started, and I contacted Scott Fleming when we were initially thinking about it. Half of the battle's just sort of getting into your head, like nobody else is doing this, so why not? Why is it not going to be a success?
Yeah.
Just, you can go out and you can actually do these things, and again, it's not going to be perfect when you start, but then over time you'll gradually learn things, you'll learn where you're comfortable and your skill sets and what you can do. Final question. The book's only just been released, but this is a question from myself personally. Are there any other times with Rovers that potentially catch your eye that you would think, actually, that might be one that I might go for in the future in terms of another era, maybe a Claude Anelkis look into the sort of reclaim the Rovers, or would you be looking more in terms of the Ramsden's Cup stories, or what would be any in particular that would potentially jump out for you?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one. I mean, I guess the route I've gone down is writing about things that kind of I experienced and enjoyed and kind of got a lot of pleasure out of, whether that was the Rovers, that period in the Rovers history, or Scotland women qualifying for the World Cup and going to the World Cup. I guess the Ramses is the obvious one. I don't think I would like to do a kind of dissection of the Claude and Elke years that were bad enough to actually experience at the time. Probably the one of the lowest kind of moments following Rovers, but yeah, I don't know. I tend not to kind of write a book and then move right on to the next one. I leave big gaps between them, so I'll have to kind of I'll have to kind of mull that over for a while. Maybe the Ramsden's Cup, I don't know, but I'd maybe like to hold off, and if maybe we could win another cup, who knows?
Well.
I'll definitely tell the story of that. But no, as I said, there is a chapter that I spoke to Ian Murray and interviewed Ian Murray. So there is a chapter that kind of brings it up to date. Obviously, talks about what happened after Munich, and then brings it right up to date with that kind of season. So even if you weren't there during Munich, there's a chapter that kind of talks about Ian Murray's thoughts on kind of that season, and obviously that was a kind of magnificent time for the club as well. But yeah, there's nothing that kind of jumps out at the moment in terms of, but fingers crossed there might be in the.
Don't worry, I'm not going to be sitting there prodding you with a stick for your next for the fourth instalment, Stephen. There's no pressure. How did you find it speaking to Ian Murray? Actually, just obviously he's since departed the club, and that was a period that just so many fans got so much enjoyment out of. So again, as you say, it's kind of reminiscent that season in terms of the success that we had in the 90s.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, it was the moment, I guess when I was thinking through how to start the book. I mean, obviously my previous books, you kind of start them in dramatic moments, whether it's Scotland getting knocked out of the World Cup and the Women's World Cup, or the penalty, Paul McStay stepping up to take the penalty. It wasn't as clear, I guess, how to kind of get into this story. And it was only after a while I kind of thought, and I did want to bring it up to date. I thought actually that day up at Dingwall was very reminiscent, and I think Graham Meldrum's got a quote, and it felt like the kind of bond was back there. For so many years the club had been a bit drifting a little bit, and obviously under John McGlynn we did great things as well, but it felt very much like Rovers are back. Okay, we didn't get to the Premiership, but we were being talked about again. We were as close. It had that, for me, it had that Jimmy Nicholl era feel about it that season. So I think that's where I kind of thought about it. Ian had actually left the club by the point I contacted him. So again, I just thought, well, will he want to speak about it, given it how it ended for him? But he was great. He was really willing to kind of go over that season, talk about that season, talk about kind of Raith Rovers and kind of what it means to him. So, and I think hopefully it kind of fits quite well in that sense of, this is a time when we're getting back as kind of as close as we can. So yeah, he was incredibly helpful, and Davy Hancock helped me kind of get that introduction. And again, it was great to talk to him, and it was my daughter's kind of gap year before going to university that season. So we had a whale of a time, and to be able to kind of, again, it's something to talk about in the book, being able to kind of travel to games with her and see her getting almost the kind of experience that I would have had in the 90s of being successful, of doing really well, of real kind of hope and optimism at a perfect time in her kind of life, before she went away to university, and found it a bit more of a struggle to get to games. So to have that, and to speak to Ian about that, and I guess be able to thank him at the end for that as well, of what a great season it was, and definitely for me the most enjoyable since the 90s, in terms of, obviously there's been great moments at Ramsden's Cup, cup wins, promotions, but that season against Dundee United, and those some of the moments in that, as and I talked. I mean, that was a great thing. The podcast came in at that moment as well, because
we
do it on a Saturday.
Struck gold, absolutely struck gold.
Yeah, but again, just to be able to to do that on a Saturday, relive it on a Sunday or a Monday, listening to you guys talking about it, and just that whole kind of community sense was just brilliant. So yeah, Ian was great, and again, being able to kind of thank him for that season personally was a nice thing as well, because it was hugely enjoyable.
I think that is a lot of the time that's the difficulty with football, because you come to the end of the season or a manager gets sacked and you don't really get the chance to thank them. I do remember sort of saying that when Ian Murray, we did sort of I think that's our most listened to episode that we ever did, because it was such a shock that Ian Murray got sacked. We got quite a lot of people picking that one up. And I remember saying in that one, specifically saying, just to thank him, because we had so many high moments under his tenure, and then it's kind of just over, and it's not like a sacked manager is going to be coming back to the club. Certainly, I mean, it might do some point further down the line, whether it's coming back as a guest, etc., because you know how people's attitudes can change, but we've had that a few times before in the past where players have maybe left quite abruptly, like so maybe Grant Anderson, David McGurn, where it's been the end of a season, contract released, gone, and they don't really get a chance to say goodbye. And you have that attachment. But anyway, I'm digressing. Stephen, I just want to thank you again, exceptionally generous by your time. It's always great to be able to talk about these moments. You're of course welcome back at any point if you want to come on to share your thoughts for a pre or post match podcast. We're more than happy to have you on as part of the group. The book is of course out now. You can pick up a copy in the club shop. So they have them available there with I believe all the markup you were saying is going to the club, is it, in terms of that?
Yeah, so they're obviously available all the usual places, but there will be copies in the club shop, and absolutely all of the kind of what you're paying for it in the club shop will go to Raith Rovers. So if you want to give as much as possible to Raith Rovers, then I'd urge you to kind of buy from the club shop directly. So that you can you can give as much as you can to the club. I mean, for me, there would be no books without the club. So I want to kind of give something back to the club so that they can, obviously part of it is kind of documenting this period. And as you said, getting to say thank you. The books are a kind of thank you to the players for kind of making it happen and giving us who were lucky enough to experience those times. But yeah, I would urge you to buy from the club shop if you possibly can, if you're looking to buy anybody for yourself or for someone for a Christmas or birthday present.
Well, it is on the horizon, so keep an eye out there. And of course, 16th of October, 7 p.m, you're going to be in conversation with Danny Lennon. So that is one very much to look forward to. So limited tickets available left for that. Contact Waterstones. I'll put in a link in the show notes with the contact details for that. But yeah, just Stephen, thanks again for joining me this evening. And we will, of course, be back at some point in the near future for our pre-match podcast, looking ahead to Saturday's game against Ayr United. But thank you for taking the time to listen. And Stephen, thanks again.
Thanks very much.
Okay, and bye for now.